Fingers crossed. Good luck.
Hello, hey Matt, we're live here again.
Are we on?
Hello, PhotoPills, Rafael Demar here. Welcome to another masterclass. Today we're gonna learn how to create amazing time lapse movies and films for beginners with the great Matthew Vandeputte. Matthew, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today with us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for almost pronouncing my name very, very
Almost.
correctly. Vandeputte. You forgot the E at the end. Vandeputte, Matthew Vandeputte, or Matthew
Vandeputte. Okay. Well, I'm
but,
very famous.
No, it's great. It's great to be here finally after a very long time.
I'm famous by by not pronouncing any word correctly in English. I get a lot of comments in my YouTube videos that nobody understands me, but yeah, it's the way it is.
Got to add the subtitles.
Matt,
cool. I don't know how this
Yeah.
starts. Do you introduce me? Do I talk about myself for a bit and then we get on, or how do we proceed?
Feel free to introduce yourself.
Okay, cool. Well, hello everyone. Goedendag. My name is Matthew Vandeputte. I am known online, I guess, as Matt Joes, which is just a nickname. A lot of people think my name is Matt Joes, which it's not. It's just a nickname. I'm a time warper or a time lapse photographer, and I've been doing this for about 11 years now. And in this live with the wonderful PhotoPills crew, I will be sharing the basics of time lapse, how to plan, shoot, and edit. I've got a whole keynote screen thing that I'll be sharing. It's all out of my hands. Normally, I've got like a switchboard myself for when I do my lives, but today I'll be giving you hopefully everything you need to get started with making time lapse sequences, which is, in case you don't know, obviously a total hybrid between photography and videography. We're going to be creating sequences of photos, and we're going to turn that into video files to hopefully wow your audience or your friends or family if you don't have an audience, like most people, I guess. I'm waffling already. Belgian waffle at the start. I'm Belgian originally, by the way, if anyone's wondering where I'm from.
Awesome. This is going to be super fun. And by the way, guys, if you have a question, just, type it in the chat, because we have, as always, the great Sandra Vallaur in the chat. She will be
Thank you, Sandra, for the
questions. She will collecting the questions for us, and I'll be asking Matt. So, Matt, if you're ready, I'm ready.
If you wanna switch to my screen, or do I have to stop? No, you want
me to share the slides?
Show the opening one, and then we can go on the next slide.
So the video.
Let's do it. A little video to show my work. Wow. Well
awesome.
Done. Me.
Wow. It worked.
That used to be an in-between thing for my streams. I used to live stream on Fridays, and anytime I'd go and grab a beer or something, I would just play that on loop, and people always loved it. So I assume it was a good video to show today. It's got a bit of travel video in there, but a lot of time-lapse and hyperlapse and a bit of astro time-lapse as well. And yeah, I guess that's... a little bit, there was a cool video to show my work. A little bit about me before we begin. What's on screen? I got to figure out, because I got two displays. What are we learning today? The workshop outline, I guess, if you want to know what we'll be getting at today. An introduction about me, all about me. Just going to give you some context so you know I'm a trustworthy person when it comes to everything you're going to be learning today. We'll be talking about planning, shooting, editing, and some questions as well at the end. But yeah, let me do some more waffling about myself. That's a photo I took in Australia. I used to live in Australia from 2013 for 6 and a bit years. As I mentioned, I'm from Antwerp in Belgium originally, and then I met a girl, and then I moved to Australia, and then that girl moved to London. So now I live in London, where sadly we don't have as many night skies as you see in this photo here. Where you can make out the two Magellanic Clouds as well, two other galaxies in the southern hemisphere. Wonderful spots, and I miss it dearly. But who am I and what do I do? I guess, I call myself a time warper, because it's kind of an all-encompassing term for me, but I when I meet people in the industry, I say I'm a time lapse photographer or I'm a hyperlapse photographer, because the people that know what that is, they know what that is, but other people just they very rarely have an idea of what that actually entails. I'm also I actually changed this from influencer to social media content creator because I find that much more bearable to hear. But I really dislike the whole contentification of everything lately, where everything is content. But it is, I guess, part of my job as well. It's one of my income streams. It's creating content on social media for myself on my YouTube channel, which I've had since 2007. I think I've been making videos for a very, very long time. So yeah, you'll find hundreds of time-lapse videos on my channel as well. So yeah, social media content creator. I do the odd bit of content licensing for brands or agencies or firms that are like, oh, we need this very niche time lapse that we found on your Vimeo or YouTube channel. Can we use that for an ad campaign or for a film or a TV show intro sequence, stuff like that? That's also another small part of my income streams. Do the odd workshop. We're doing a workshop right now, but I do real life workshops as well. And I was talking to the Bard earlier about maybe doing some PhotoPills collaborations in the future, which would be fun. And then awesome. Then if you want to find out more about that, let us know in the comments. That would be good. Video and content production for brands could be just standard video, travel videos. I used to do a lot of travel stuff before the world shut down, but hopefully that's all coming back soon. And then one of my other income streams, bit of self promo here, is the Ultimate Time Lapse course, which has a special code at the end here, but the code's PhotoPills, 20% off. In my opinion, one of the best time lapse courses, and there's also time lapse for beginners. But enough promo about me. Let's get to some actual knowledge here. So, time lapse shooting methods. I mentioned earlier that a lot of people are totally oblivious, completely unaware of what time lapse is, and I must say I was like that as well. And I assume maybe some of you are in that category. Like, what actually is a time lapse? I remember seeing it for the first time, and I'm like, is this video that is sped up, or what is actually this thing that I'm looking at? I was thinking like video speeding it up. It can't be great because you're shooting all this video for a very long time. You're draining battery throughout it. You're draining storage, and you're gonna then speed it all up. So you're gonna waste a lot of this energy and a lot of these frames. So that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Isn't it better to shoot stills and then create video from said stills? What do you think? There's also another method, of course, where depending on your camera, it's kind of a hybrid. It shoots video frames and it renders that in camera. So Canon actually does that on, for example, the 60 Mark II that we have here. I think it was introduced on this camera, or maybe another model, but it's pretty much shooting video at an extremely slow frame rate. So it would shoot, depending on your interval settings, in this system from anywhere 1 second to, I forget how long in between frames it shoots, but it shoots a digital video still, and then when you hit stop, it compiles all those into a video file, and you end up with a finished video file. What you don't end up with on the Canon system is your raw files, which is something we'll talk about later, which is definitely what you want to get. That's all for basic time-lapse stuff. When I say basic time-lapse stuff or static exposure time-lapses, I mean time-lapses shot in the daytime or in the nighttime. Anything in between, sunset or sunrise, we call that Holy Grail. We call that a Holy Grail because it used to be very difficult, and it was the Holy Grail of time-lapse. We've moved well beyond that now. Time-lapse has gotten easier to shoot and edit. A lot of cameras have some really great built-in features these days, but it still is there. A Holy Grail shot needs a little bit more time and work and experience, maybe. You can shoot a Holy Grail, so a sunset or a sunrise, in many different ways as well. You have your aperture priority mode. You can shoot it the manual LR time-lapse method. You can crossfade clips into each other. You can use an external bulb ramping device. But what we'll be talking about today, generally for our static basic exposure time-lapses, is we're going to be shooting stills, and we're going to be creating video from said stills, because I assume most of you are photographers, and that's what we're mostly familiar with. So now we can move on to how to actually shoot a time-lapse and write stuff down here, or follow along with the camera to set it up for that. Do whatever you please. Pretty much, let's begin with the gear, right? Because some people might think like, do we need anything special, like special remotes? Yes and no, depends on the system that you're on. But let's begin with cameras. So shooting a time lapse on an analog film camera, doable, not advisable. I have shot for the majority of my career, which spans just over a decade now, on DSLRs. I've shot on a bunch of 6D Mark IIs, a lot of Canon cameras, but then in the last couple of years, I've taken on a bunch of Lumix cameras as well. So I've gone from DSLR to mirrorless, which for me has pros and cons. I've got here an S1 as well as an S5 with a little cage around it. One of the biggest cons for me is honestly the amount of dust I get on the sensor, on the screen in front of the sensor. I really don't like that, because you don't just have to edit out spots from one photo. You have to do that for a lot of photos in the end. But the majority of the time lapses I shoot these days, I record on the Lumix system. Mostly because the built-in time lapse features in this Lumix system is just streets ahead of a lot of other brands. I think Sony comes close, or maybe is on par with Lumix as far as like allowing you to dial in settings for example, a Holy Grail, so that you can have a hands-off experience. But I'll demo how to do that on Canon later, maybe if we have time, which I think we will have, because I usually barrel through these things at high speed. What else do we need? A lens. I'm a big fan. This might be an unpopular opinion. I'm a big fan of zoom lenses, because time-lapse photography comes with a lot of extra gear. I've got big f-stop camera bags, and I've got tripods, and you got motion control stuff, and you got controllers and extra batteries and storage and offload kit, and you name it, like all of this extra stuff. The last thing I want to do is pack 4 different lenses, prime lenses, if I can just have one really nice zoom lens. So one of my favorite lenses that I use is not this one, but this one. It's a f4 lens. It's a 24-105 f4 image stabilized lens. I use this for the majority of my time lapses. This is a Lumix one, but any high-end or like decent end brand these days makes a solid zoom lens. Because we are shooting time lapses and not handheld, we're shooting stuff on a tripod. The fact that this is an f4 lens doesn't matter too much for your shutter speed. Like, you don't have to increase your shutter speeds. We're going to be lengthening them anyway, and you're going to be stopping them down anyway as well. So all modern day zoom lenses will be sharp enough for what you are achieving. Trust me. So I used to shoot a lot on the 24-70 f4 Canon lens as well, which is not the one on here. But yeah, I save my back a little bit, my lower back, which I've ruined over the years of lugging around 20-kilo backpacks on mountain ranges and of volcanoes and riverbeds and all that. You just save a bit of weight, because as I mentioned, there's a lot of extra kit that comes with time lapse. So a good zoom lens allows me to save a bit of that. Now, intervalometer, or a shutter, or a remote, or a controller, whatever you want to call it, depending on your camera system, you're going to want to have an external one. Or on the Lumix system, I barely use an external controller because they have a really great intervalometer built in. But I have a full drawer here of my gear trolley with a bunch of controllers. This is probably the most well-known one. This is like Canon TC80N3, which is fairly expensive, but weather sealed and works on the 60 upwards line. Here we have a SERP Genie microcontroller, which is one of those like cool smart ones that you plug in via USB-C. All of these have their pros and cons. This is a time-lapse plus view intervalometer, which has a light metering device at the top, which you mount this on top of your camera, and it's going to control your settings for you as the light is changing. Pretty advanced stuff, but I don't really need it anymore because of how good the Lumix system is. What do we have here? We have the Fullography Unleashed, which is a small slidey boy that you plug into the side of your camera. This is a really cool product. It opens up time-lapse features and bulb ramping, etc. Just by plugging this little thing on the side. Very interesting. There are some radio-controlled remotes. like the Hanel Capture, which you can also use as a wired remote or wireless. This also doubles quite easily for, if you're shooting at time, or if you're shooting on a tripod in a landscape and you want to place yourself in it, you could just go and then click once you're in your spot, tiny human in a big location. But why not just shoot a time lapse and then you can Photoshop yourself out later. So yeah, bunch of remotes. I also have here. Oh, I don't have it here. Where is it? The LR Timer Pro Timer 3, which is made by Gunther, the developer of LR Time Lapse. Did I say LR Timer earlier? That was wrong. It's LR Time Lapse Pro Timer 3. This is the latest model, custom designed for time lapse photographers. Really, really cool features built into this. I've got a bunch of content about all these remotes on my channels, as I'm sure you were expecting. But yeah, depending on your needs, there's going to be the correct remote control for.
So you're using all of them, right? Or you have a favorite one, or
I don't use any of these anymore. I just use the built-in controller on the Lumix because it's so good.
Okay.
I mean,
good to know.
You could pair the LR time lapse controller with a Android, I think iPhone now as well, tablet or phone, and it would change your settings for you for the Holy Grail shooting. But now the Sonys, I think the Nikons as well, the Canons in video mode, and the Lumixes with RAW and JPEG files, they just all do it built in. So that's what I mentioned earlier. Like, we should maybe change it from Holy Grail time lapse to, I don't know, something else, because it's really not that hard anymore to create those shots.
Interesting.
So yeah, I still carry remotes with me just in case as a backup set, but most often now, I'd say 95% of my time lapses I shoot with the built-in menu settings of the Lumix or other brands. So that's pretty fun. Like, in my almost 11 years of doing time lapse, I've seen technology, advance and made stuff more accessible. Like, I've got in my phone now, I've got a Samsung. What do I have? S21. Yeah, S21 phone. I've got a Holy Grail mode built in as well. If you shoot time lapse in night mode, it slowly adjusts the settings and there's almost no flickering. So it's really quite wild to see that. What else do you need? A battery and a memory card. And I put these two together because depending on where you are in your professional life, you might be tempted to buy aftermarket brands or cloned or fake, not well-known brands. I would advise against this, because the nature of time-lapse photography is you're going to be trekking with a bunch of kit to a really cool location, and you're going to be committing yourself for a very long time to sit somewhere and shoot. And if your $10 aftermarket crappy battery dies on you, you're going to really kick yourself. So don't skimp on cheap batteries and don't buy cheap memory cards. Buy stuff that will, save up a little bit more money and buy stuff that won't fail on you randomly. Reliability. Reliability is a big thing I focus on. Same with, as most of you would know, cheap tripods. It's not worth it buying a cheap tripod. It's going to break soon. You're going to have to buy another one, and then by then you might as well have just bought a nicer one from the start. So yeah, battery and memory card, obviously pack them, but when you're buying them, make sure they're good. And again, here also the tripod. I use a lot of carbon fiber tripods, again, just to save weight on this big backpack. But then you're gonna want to find a balance if you're standing in a windy spot, because you're shooting photo after photo after photo. If it's like shaking and stuff from the wind, you're going to be seeing that vibrate a bit, and then you're going to have to stabilize that. Or if you're shooting long exposures, then that's going to be an issue as well. So find a tripod that works well for you. I've got a gear page on my website if anyone's wondering what my latest kit is. But my main tripod is it's a Manfrotto 190 Go with a magnesium ball head and just a carbon fiber twist lock legs. I've had that for, 6 years, and it's still going strong, which is pretty fun.
Nice.
Pretty good. And what else do you need? It's not really gear, but you need a subject. You need to shoot something. And I started exactly like this. I was just shooting my backyard and the tree in my backyard and the cloud in my backyard. And don't do that. Leave your house. Get on your bike. Leave this, like people getting a camera for a new camera or a new lens. They stay in and they shoot their cat or their dog, and that's cute and all. But don't leave the house. Go somewhere. Find yourself a nice subject. Again, you're going to commit yourself for quite a while in the planning and the shooting and the editing phases. So make it worth your while. Go and find yourself a cool looking church or a hillside or an overview of the town or city you live in. You know, step out. How to prepare a shoot? Yeah, it's pretty much what I'm getting at now. Like, you know, you want to set out with a vision or a goal in mind. Don't just shoot your cat or that backyard tree. You could do better than that. So I'm trying to get comfortable on this chair. Yeah, set out with a vision or a goal. Have something that's just more visually appealing. And while you're at it, maybe think of a shot list or a storyline where if you have a zoom lens where you can frame up multiple angles or compositions, try and get, you know, at least 3 different shots of subjects you want to say. For example, you're shooting a church or a church tower. Get yourself a nice wide one, maybe a wide angle one from up close, one from further away, a little bit zoomed in, so you have that nice compressed POV, and maybe shoot a little detail shot as well, or find another interesting element. Like, try and find different shots, find contrast in your shots, in your composition. So you can, when you eventually get to the video editing stage, you can cut from one shot to the next shot without it looking like a jump cut, because you want to have diversity or contrast in your shots, and that's gonna help you making a shot list. So yeah, before you leave, have a little bit of a vision of what it is that you want to achieve, and maybe do some storyboarding. You know, just draw out a couple of squares and fill that in with what you want to shoot. And obviously,
Matt, how do you get creative? I mean, it's easy to say, yeah, find something to shoot. And,
I don't know.
It's like, find your vision and goal. But man, in your case, how do you get inspired? How do you come up with an idea you want to shoot? Or how you use time to communicate, right? Ideas.
Yeah, well, I find that it's a tricky question. People. This is the most controversial thing. I always piss people off when I say this. I don't consider myself creative. I consider myself a creator, or more of a technical shooter, but not a creative shooter. So I apply the same principle, that is time lapse or speeding up time, to just everything I see. And I just wait. I shoot so much that out of the 10 or 20 or 30 shots, at least one of them will look good enough. So I just overshoot, and I then try and make it all fit together in the edit. But how do you come up with creative shots? Possibly it's just an experience thing, and I feel not very experienced in the creative realm, but I actually am. But I'm always comparing myself to people that I think are better or more creative or more interesting. So I always feel a little bit inadequate. But then I look at where I started, and I'm like, that is improvement. Like, that is a solid amount of improvement over the years. So I think
definitely your videos are very, very particular.
Yeah, I like to edit to glitchy, or like, music with a little bit of a beat, which I was told in film school is predictable, but the audience loves it and I love it, so screw it. I'm making it for them, and for me, not for this film school professor.
Awesome. For sure.
But that's actually makes me think now, like, when you get to a location, and I made a whole video about this 2 years ago, don't make the mistake of arriving and setting up the shot. Arrive and then walk around everywhere and go wide and go tight. If you have a zoom lens or change lenses, try and find the most interesting angle, because chances are that the most interesting shot isn't right where you're arriving, generally.
Sure.
And that ties in very well to research your locations, and I've been using PhotoPills for since before you guys were on Android, I think.
Yeah, I think you were one of the first ones.
I was early. I feel like I was early. That's why I like the brand so much, because I've seen you guys grow, and I've seen all the features get added to the apps, to the app. But I use PhotoPills a lot just to see, with the pins I drop myself, I see what it lines up with, which building, when that's going to that lineup's going to change in the year. Here in London, I've got a flat that we call the Cloud Palace, because it's on the 7th floor. We've got 270-degree view almost. And with the planner, I can just see when the sun's going to hit a certain building in a couple months, or, maybe it was a couple months ago. Like, I can make plans for the future with that. I also use Google Maps, which is kind of, built into PhotoPills as well. But I research my locations a lot before I head somewhere, because if, say I travel with my fiance to a city, I'll go on Google Maps and I'll find good looking spots. photos that have a lot of views, or I'll use geotags on social media, like on Instagram, or back in the day, maybe Flickr had that. I don't think TikTok has it. I mean, maybe I just do some research beforehand to help me with, creating this vision and the shot list, and you might print out or take screenshots of it and put it in a little document. But yeah, I research locations before I go there. When I was doing a lot of travel work for destinations, like one of them was for tours in Dubai, I wish that I had done much more research in advance. This was in 2015. If I had another job come up like that in the near future, I would pretty much storyboard my entire film, or at least the shot list beforehand, by using websites, social media platforms, etc., to just kind of make that storyboard or shot list. While you're preparing for your shoots, charge, format, and clean. It's nothing like arriving at a site and then figuring out that your battery's half dead. There's 1,000 photos on your memory card that you're not entirely sure if you backed them up or not. So can you format the cards, or did you even offload them? Not ideal. Oh, and there's also some dust on your sensors. So screw you. Have fun shooting. So do all this stuff before you leave. Charge, format, and clean. That's a good thing to do when you're in the packing stage of your trip, which obviously also you want to pack your bag and head out. Pack your bag in a smart way as well. Make sure that you have a packing system or a location system. I've got a couple of backpacks, but I use the same principle. Like my charged batteries will also always be in the similar spots in whatever bag. The empty ones, full memory card is in a certain orientation in my memory card pouch, and that card pouch is also in the most easily accessible spot in that bag. Like, once you figure out a system for yourself, just apply that, and that will really minimize issues, because sometimes you get to location and the light's just popping off and you don't have much time to think. You'll be making mistakes. You want to remove mistakes as much as possible in advance. And I mean, in case you haven't figured that out yet, I'm passionate about efficiency, and this is all part of that. Using the same tripod mount or the same tripod system across the board for years, and very fast and very efficient in doing all this, and packing and formatting. And we'll see this in the edit later as well. It's all about efficiency. We're almost half an hour in, and I'm only at prepping, and I've got a couple more slides for you guys. So I'm going to go on. Basic shoot theory. Find your spot and inspect your surroundings. Here's a mistake I've made: not inspecting my surroundings. You're on the beach and there's a certain tide going in or out. You're not aware of it. That will change the composition of the soil that you're on, and that will change how your tripod stands on it. You're in a lake that's getting filled up with rainwater or whatever, or you're on a boardwalk. People are going to walk past when it's peak hour. All this stuff will move your tripod. Maybe there's a very famous spot in Sydney where people shoot sunset from next to a car park, but at peak hour, these buses full of tourists get offloaded, and then they will get into your shot and they will bump into your tripod. So really look at your surroundings, where you are. Will there be an increase in wind, or will a certain shadow fall across your location, or will there be more tourists or more foot traffic, or will traffic rules change at a certain time that make your situation unsafe from where you're shooting? Really figure out, try and think of all these things when you're setting up. Because if you're setting up for a 3-hour long shot and 1/3 of the way in, or 2/3 of the way in, or halfway in, all of a sudden you have to leave, that just really sucks. So be aware. A prime example is leaning your tripod against a fence. You're there by yourself, or you're clamping your camera onto a fence. You're there by yourself, and then right as the shot's looking really nice, people arrive and start leaning on the fence, and your shot's ruined. All of this stuff has happened to me. So be aware that the shot that you're setting up has to be safe and secure and solid and sturdy for the next 3 or however many hours. Could be 20 minutes as well, by the way. A lot of my time lapses are just 10 to 20 minutes shots.
Okay.
Make sure your setup is sturdy, and make sure your bag is accessible. A lot of people use their bag to weigh down their their tripod when they're shooting, right? Well, what if your battery dies while you're shooting? You're going to have to jumble in your bag that's hanging off your tripod, and you're going to move your tripod, and you're going to move your composition and your framing. So have accessibility to your batteries or memory cards or your lens cloth or blower or whatever it is that you're going to be needing potentially. during your shoot. To set up your framing, your composition, if you have a zoom lens, frame up and then zoom out just a little bit of a zoom out, a couple of mils, because if something bumps into your tripod and your frame shifts slightly, you will be able to stabilize that. But if you're like very tight on, like you can reframe if you zoom out a bit, and because you have the resolution. But if you're very tight on the Eiffel Tower, for example, and you're so tight on it that even a small bump cuts the frame off of the tower, you're screwed. So we're shooting photos and we're making video. You're going to have enough pixels to reframe for your video file. So zoom out or frame out a little bit wider than you would do initially. And then please do shoot raw photos, but I don't think I have to tell the people watching this stream that I don't think I have to tell you why raw files are so much better than JPEG files, right? Quick interval guideline: 1, 3 to 6 seconds for people, clouds, or sunset. If it's foot traffic or vehicular traffic, which is also people, bicycles, scooters, cars, whatever, a 1 second interval if your camera can pull that off and your memory card. That's my advised shooting speed: 1 second in between photos, which is what we call the interval. Do check this beforehand. A lot of cameras won't be able to pull that off. Last couple of generations of cameras will, but when I was shooting on the 5D3 Canon with a certain memory card, it would start buffering after, I don't know, 70 photos or something in my case, with the card I was using at the time. If you don't know that and you're shooting a crucial sequence and you're finding that out on the spot, that's all very frustrating. So stress test your kit before you head out. These are guidelines, by the way, generally, but on average, the interval I use for cloud shooting is 3 seconds, and then anything else, like a sunset or longer stuff, is about 6 seconds. But depending on the speed of the cloud, which can depend on the wind and the altitude of the clouds, which is a whole other thing that comes with just experience, you might want to shoot your sunset at 5 seconds or 10 or 15 seconds interval. How many photos you shoot? I advise 200 photos minimum. Lately, I've actually revised this to 300 photos minimum. 200 photos in a PAL country, which is what I'm in now. A lot of the US is in an NTSC country. But 200 photos at 25 frames a second will result in 8 seconds of video. I'll talk more about that later. And then for every sequence that you shoot, you want to make a new folder in your camera. Or if you don't have that option, you want to shoot, if you're on a tripod, this is battery dead now. Just shoot a couple of dark frames in between your time-lapse sequences so that when they're all loaded in Lightroom later, you can quickly identify the start and the end of your shots. But I just make folders in camera, or I use a plugin in Lightroom. And then a big tip: once your time-lapse is running, you want to let it run, because if you're breaking up your shot halfway through to shoot something else, you're going to screw up the second shot, and you're not going to have a good first shot, and you're going to have 2 crappy shots instead of 1 good shot. Or bring a second camera to set up your second shot. But yeah, once it's running, let it run. I still find myself making this mistake every now and then, which is tricky, because you're so tempted to, like, oh, this cloud's moving just out of frame and it's looking really cool. Should I reframe? No. Let it run. Don't change. This is what I was getting at earlier. So video plays at 25 frames a second on average in PAL countries. If you shoot 100 frames, aka 100 photos, you divide that by 25. That's 4 seconds of footage. So 200 frames by 25 is 8 seconds of footage, in case you weren't across that from earlier. On a lot of these remotes and these intervalometers and built-in software, you can set a max limit, a number of photos to shoot. The Canon system allows 2 digits for some weird reason. The Lumix allows 4, so does Sony and Nikon and everyone else, I think. But what I don't usually do is set a upper limit, because once you've set up your shot and it's just running and running, you're on your phone, you're reading, whatever, you're distracted, you're chatting to someone. The 300 photos have passed and the camera stops, but the light's still really good. Just don't set a limit on that. Don't set an upper limit. Just set it to 0 or N, depending on the shutter controller or remote. It'll just keep going. It'll keep shooting infinitely until you stop it. And you can use this as a very basic help with that. If you want to have a 10-second video with a 3-second interval, you're gonna shoot 250 photos and it's going to take that amount of time. You can set up. I usually do this. Set up alarms on my phone instead of an upper limit on the remote. This is in my ebook as well. But yeah, screenshot this, print it out, do with it whatever you want. It's a nice little freebie for you. A very, very basic, what do you call it? Yeah, little graph of shooting and recording times. Then this is so generally in cinematography, you're or if you translate the 180-degree rule from filmmaking to time lapse, your interval divided by 2 should be your shutter speed. This is to get the most beautiful looking motion blur, the most cinematic shots. But this, I don't know. I've never really used this for intervals higher than 6 seconds. This does work for your 1 and 3 second style intervals. So, for example, if you're shooting people or clouds at 2 seconds, your 1 second exposure, or your exposure should be 1 second. But mostly for people. I said clouds. I didn't mean that. That was a mistake. Like, who's going to notice if you're shooting a big wide angle cityscape of all these clouds, if you're recording them at a 1 second exposure or at a 100th of a second exposure? No one's going to be able to tell the difference unless you really like pixel peep and zoom in. But if you're shooting people doing like Shibuya Crossing, for example, or a highway with cars, that's where this will make a big difference. So this 180-degree rule from filmmaking doesn't apply to all subject matter in time-lapse, but it is a nice guideline. And ND filters are your friends here. I use a range of filters, but mostly I use Polar Pro filters. They sent me this one a while back, which is a screw-in filter, which I really like because it's just smaller. Again, it's more lightweight to bring with me. Just screw it in, and this is actually, I believe it's a 10-stop ND filter that is also a polarizer, which I often use to make the sky pop, or reflections on buildings and stuff that really just can really change your footage, as I'm sure you all know. I'm assuming you're all fairly well versed in filters. And then I use a lighter ND circular polarizer as well, just to drag the shutter every now and then indoors. Right, what are we at? Oh god, gotta go. Shoot everything on manual. That's I should have maybe started with that. So you're gonna set your camera on manual mode because you are in control. Your camera most often doesn't know that it's shooting a time lapse. It thinks that it's just shooting photos. But what you want is for every photo to be the exact same. So lock everything in, lock your exposure in. So ISO, shutter speed, aperture, white balance, everything is up to you to decide. Because if you let the camera decide, it's going to, depending on where that cloud is or how that shadow moves, it's going to change its exposure, and that's not what you want because that will result in flickering, and flickering is one of the most common mistakes seen in time-lapse, which is not what we want. And then also turning off image review will save you some battery, and turning off image stabilization will save you some time in post-production of stabilizing your shots. I was thinking, depending on my timing, to include advanced shoot theory, but we won't have time. But this is what a sunset graph looks like in LA. Depending on where you are in the world, this S-curve looks different, looks steeper, depending on the seasons and location on the planet. This is a very slow gradient if you're in Iceland, for example, currently, I believe. But yeah, let's go through the manual Holy Grail method because we won't have time for that today. Maybe we can do another one. If you want to do another stream like this about time lapse, let us know in the comments. Common mistake.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Common mistakes is like, oh, I was shooting some sports earlier and I wasn't shooting around. I was just slamming around with JPEGs and I forgot to turn the RAWs back on. You're going to regret that. Not checking or formatting your card, you're going to regret that when your card is full and the light is beautiful and the camera stops shooting because it's run out of space. Not shooting everything on manual, also going to regret that because you're going to have to deflicker, which is a lot of extra work in post. Not locking your aperture on Canon. Who knows what I'm talking about here? Canon has a very cool thing going for it where it doesn't have, well, it does have aperture flickering, but you can stop it using the lens twist method. So aperture flickering is a thing you are, I don't want to have to, you're going to have to just deal with this focus because my camera keeps pumping. But here I am using the, hold on, where's the button? You can see the aperture blades go down, right? I'm on F9 and I'm using the DOF preview button here. For every photo that your camera takes, these aperture blades close, which is fine if you're shooting portraits or landscapes or whatever. But if you're shooting a time lapse on a tripod of a cityscape or a landscape, where this closes for every photo and the mechanism in your lens isn't 100% accurate, that small difference per closing is going to result in a different amount of light hitting your sensor. Again, normally not an issue, but if you're going to play these frames back at 25 frames a second or 30 frames a second, you're going to see that flickering. And it's going to be a very annoying, very distracting, very jarring look in your time-lapse footage, in the sky mostly, that you're going to have to deflicker. So how can you stop that flickering from happening? Well, you can lock your aperture on Canon cameras and maybe other systems as well by using the so-called lens twist method, which is here with that DOF, depth of field preview button enabled. I am going to half twist the lens off without touching the focus. Now you will see that for every photo I take, that aperture is still closed. So there is no variable aperture here closing. It is just stuck on that. Now, please don't forget to click that back in when you leave, because this lens is now wanting to go and ruin your day. I was in New Zealand once on Roy's Peak in Wanaka, and I forgot to click the lens back in, and the time lapse was done. Whack the thing on my bag, blah, blah, blah. And what do I hear? My brand new Takina 11-16 lens flopping off the camera and rolling down the hill. And I am like, no. Luckily,
that hurts.
Luckily, it literally like bumped into a piece of grass and it stayed there, and I managed to walk down and grab it. So, but yeah, that is a thing that you should maybe put a piece of tape on your camera before you walk away. Like, your lens is not locked in. Just be mindful of that. Oh yeah, that was just the whole aperture flickering thing that I explained.
Matt, talking about damaging equipment, we have a question from Thomas Norman. He's asking, have you ever damaged a camera sensor from a sunset time lapse? I mean,
No.
From all the sun rays going through your lens?
Yeah, good question. Something I've thought about a lot, but not something I've ever experienced. The closest I would have come is with my Nikon P1000, which is that ultra hyper zoom camera that has like, I think it's the equivalent of like 2000 mil. If you zoom that into the sun and the sun is literally filling the screen, it will, I assume, melt your camera sensor or something. So I think I was using 15 stops of ND filters in front of the lens. I've never been risky with that. If I'm using a long lens and I'm shooting into the sun, I will put a 10 stop ND filter in front of that. With the focal lengths that I've had, which is I think max 400 mil, like an X2 extender and a 200 mil lens, that was good enough for sunset, where the sun isn't as bright. If you're doing that daytime shooting up, that's also different. That is definitely something you'll find more info about in the astronomy community. But yeah, I don't have too much experience. But yeah, just be mindful that it is an option indeed to damage your sensor like that. Also, I want to quickly talk about damaging your shutter mechanism. Welcome to time lapse. You're going to add a lot of clicks to your camera. I've made a video about that on my YouTube channel, which I recommend you watch if you want to find out more about. Are you ruining your camera or not by getting into time-lapse photography? But moving on, how to edit a time-lapse. I have 15 minutes left to go through this. That is a lot. So which software?
You can take, your time, Matt. Don't worry.
Yeah.
You can take your time.
Cool. Good stuff. Which software to use? There's so many different options to go with. There's Adobe Lightroom Classic. I should have amended that. And After Effects, which gives you a lot of flexibility in editing. There's Adobe Photoshop, which I'll demo, which allows you to render videos. Adobe Photoshop has a built-in video renderer, which is pretty funny. Adobe Lightroom Classic, again, with LR Time Lapse, which is what I talked about earlier, a custom-built piece of software that, has changed the world of time lapse. Big ups to Gunther. And then there are other apps that aren't as advanced, but do also allow you to turn your RAW files or your JPEG files into videos. So I have TLDF, which I believe stands for Time Lapse Deflicker. There's Stop Motion Studio, Sequence Per Second. Glue Motion is a new one that I found. These apps are all like, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 bucks and have a surprising amount of features that aren't as good as the upper half of the screen, but good enough if you want to get started with the basics. And Premiere Pro also allows you to turn files, photo files, into video files. Now, what am I demoing? I think this is kind of like, yeah, I depending on the type of shooter or creator that you are, you might be more leaning towards Premiere Pro or just Photoshop or After Effects. So what was I going to demo? I'll just run you through the process now with the Lightroom Classic and After Effects workflow, which is the one that I use for the highest possible quality results, because we're going to be retaining all our color information, bit depth, resolution, etc. We're not going to go to a proxy file to then make a video file and lose color information, for example. So I will demo this, but I'll just go over this now. We're going to make a folder structure with Post Haste. Post Haste is a free app that allows you to create templates very easily. The reason we use a template folder structure is because when you get into time lapse, which I hope some of you do, and I know some of you will, because it's very addictive and very fun, you're going to be generating thousands and thousands and thousands of photos. You're going to have so much more data than you were creating before. And maybe in a year's time, you want to re-edit something, or in a week's time, or in 10 years, you want to re-edit something. I've been using the same exact folder structure for, I think, almost 6 years now. And I can revisit hard drives, 50 hard drives back, because I'm on hard drive 62 now, I think. I can go to hard drive 30 and find the exact same folder structure for every single shoot, every single project, which allows me to locate my project files, my raw files, my edited files, my exports. So that's why we're using an app to create a folder structure. We're going to offload our memory card onto an external hard drive, because again, so much data, it likely won't fit on your laptop drive if you're working on a laptop. And obviously solid state drives are much better to work on because they're much faster. We're going to create a Lightroom catalog for each shoot, for each project, and we're going to import using the add method, which means that we're going to keep our files on that hard drive. And then you're going to find and rename and clean up all your sequences using, this is the format I use, so year, month, date, or if you're US, year, date, month. Actually, don't do that. That's stupid. Year, month, date, and maybe 4 Ys there instead of 3. Project name, and then shot name. Then you're going to color grade and synchronize your settings for each sequence. And you can change over a sequence. You can ramp, as we call it, certain settings like your white balance using a free plugin called Time Lapse Support by Jeffrey Friedel in Lightroom itself. But more about that later. Then you're going to save all those edits. You're going to save that metadata as little sidecard files, XMP files, which some of you might be familiar with. Then we're going to import that in After Effects. And then you're going to create a composition of each sequence. You can adjust some more settings, add a little zoom in or whatever. And then we're going to export video. And now let's do that, actually. But now you have an idea of the workflow. Let's see. What am I doing here? Am I on the screen? Yes. Cool, cool, cool.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So I'm going to demo you how I made this folder structure, because if you go into my movies folder, you'll see a lot of that is just the same. So I'm using Post Haste with my Pro Time Lapse templates. And let's just say I went shooting to Tower Bridge, and I shot a bunch of shots there today. I now hit Create Project, and boom, I here have a folder that has today's date, the project name, and the relevant folder. But not only that, I also have a Lightroom catalog with the same name format. I have a Final Cut project, a Premiere Pro project, and an After Effects project, all generated in 5 seconds, maybe even less.
Oh.
This is where we're going to be offloading our raw files, and this is where we will find our final renders. So that's Post Haste. That's a template that I sell, or that you can get with my time-lapse courses. More about that later. But you can just make this template yourself as well. If you have half a brain, it's very, very simple to just get Post Haste and create a custom folder template structure for yourself, for your specific needs. I'm going to open up Lightroom Classic here, and we're going to pretend like I just got back from a shoot where I offloaded my memory card into this raw folder here, and this contains the photos that I took. If you know your London from your Sydney, you will see that this wasn't shot today. This is in Sydney, Australia, from March. But imagine this folder here is just the memory card that I offloaded onto my hard drive into that raw folder. I'm going to drag that into Lightroom Classic. And let's get the correct... there we go. As I mentioned, we're using the add method here at the top. We're going to import those photos. Import. And this is where it helps having a fast solid state drive, for sure. This is only one sequence, obviously, but yeah, if you've got a bunch of sequences, this is where you would go through and find your sequences and put them in separate folders here. Where is Chopin folder? So here you would have, yeah, for example, a time lapse folder and then all your sequences in there. But let's just go over how let's quickly go over how I would color grade this. I hit D to go into develop module. And the first thing I do here is change my profile from Adobe Color to camera landscape. This can be another preset as well. Sorry, another profile. But there's a difference, and this is a recent development in the time-lapse world that someone figured out. I'm not sure who it was. Could have been Gunther. Depending on these settings, if you're Adobe Landscape or Camera Landscape, some of your editing here will impact your image non-linearly or non-globally. I mean, so if you add clarity with Camera Landscape, that won't induce extra flickering. But if you add clarity with Adobe Landscape, that will induce flickering. Very in-depth stuff. I actually shouldn't even be talking about this because this is a basic workshop. But how do I edit? I either use my time-lapse presets, which goes step by step, but let's just go just now. I want to figure out the white balance here. I would make that a little bit warmer. Just set that to 6,000. I know that because I just slide the vibrance and saturation all the way and then try and find something that's not too yellow, not too blue. It is a bit sunsetty, golden hour-ish. So I was doing this earlier, and I think I landed on, 6,000. And then you set that back for a neutral-ish, natural-looking white balance. I often make it a little bit warmer in these circumstances. I would add a little bit of exposure, not even too much contrast. I might drop the highlights down a bit here, but not too much. Just up the shadows. I'd be tempted to add a gradient, linear gradient, where I lift the shadows just a bit for the bottom bit like that, or exposure. Could do that as well. Let's just go like that. I rarely touch texture clarity, dehaze. I would just add like a little bit more vibrance and that, and boom. That is a fairly basic edit that I've done on the first photo of the sequence. And now I Command A or Control A, select all the photos with the first photo still being selected. And I right click and you go develop settings, sync settings, and you make sure everything is on, including that mask. And now it's going to synchronize from the first photo to the rest of that sequence. And that is sequence number 1, color graded. The next step is right-click on that whole sequence, go to metadata, save metadata to files, and you see here on the left that creates this new progress bar. If you now go and show in Finder, this raw file now has next to it an XMP file that is pretty much a text-based file that contains your editing that you just did. Where is, or like, numerical edits. Here we go. Let's give that a little preview. You can now see some of your EXIF data and all the adjustments that we added. What did I? Yeah, white balance, custom, temperature, 6,000. That is pretty much this entire little document are the sliders on the right of Lightroom. Why do we need this? Because we need this new edit information to be baked into the video file that we're going to be making. And we can make that in a number of ways, but let me quickly show you how I would do that with After Effects, which I know is a lot and advanced for a lot of people, but I've got a very long video on my channel that explains After Effects for beginners, for time lapsers. The sooner you start with After Effects, the more fun your life will be. It just allows you to do so many more things, from hyperlapse photography to good denoising for astro and stuff. I think After Effects is just very, very powerful. It's very efficient at rendering and all that. So the sooner you start learning with it, the better. But I'll also demo how to go from these raw photos to a video file using Premiere Pro or Photoshop in a second. So we're pretty much going to be importing the raw sequence and those XMP files into After Effects. And you can import by Control or Command I, or by going to File, Import, or by double-clicking here in the project window. And then you're going to navigate to your folder, and you're going to make sure that they're all, sequential or alphabetical. Select the first image of the sequence, and here in the bottom, create a composition, make sure it's a camera raw sequence, and if I hit force alphabetical order, it will adopt the naming structure of that sequence as well. And you'll see that these XMP files are grayed out, but because they have the same exact name as the raw files, it will open them as the settings for the sequence. As you see, that's the before and after. So it's taken on that XMP file or that edit. And here we now have the sequence and the composition that it made. And a composition is just, a sequence that you would have in Premiere Pro, for example. If you look at the settings here, it's taken on the width and the height and the aspect ratio, etc., of the photo sequence, because my photos are 6,000 by 4,000. And now you would just render that into a video file. Add it to render queue, choose your codec, ProRes 422 or ProRes 422 HQ, and your output path, which goes into the renders folders, obviously. Boom. And now you hit render and let that run. I just wanted to show After Effects because it really isn't that, hard. Like, I'm pretty much done now. And I do really want you, if you get into time lapse, to not shy away from After Effects. What does this sequence look like? I've already rendered it. It's just stunning. This is the beauty of time lapse. Just look at the shadows in the clouds, and the rays, and the boats, and the rays shooting down, the rays shooting up, the movement of the clouds. There's clouds being generated. You see the bottom bits are acting different. It's like every time-lapse shot is like a looking glass into a different version of our dimension. It's like you literally get to see behavior, light change, people moving around, traffic, clouds, shadows. You get to see all these things that we're surrounded by, but you get to see them differently. And the more you time-lapse, the more you build up your experience and your knowledge, the more you get to see and predict what this all looks like. And that's what is so fun about time-lapse. It keeps getting more and more fun. You're going to walk out every day and look at the clouds and be like, they would move this way. Or like, are they kind of static, but they're kind of bubbling up by themselves? Like, every day brings different clouds and different skies and different light. And it's just so much fun to visualize this in a new way using time-lapse photography. I shot one time-lapse 11 or 12 years ago, and I was hooked from the start. I haven't stopped shooting since. And I really do hope that some of you will experience that same thing. And then you can, add speed ramping effects and just make fun little edits. Every time-lapse sequence has hundreds of photos that might be a good enough photo for a print even as well. You can make time slices out of this. You can make this into a looping boomerang. You can, like, if this was a full day to night, I can add the bottom bit from the nighttime and have the top bit in the daytime and then crossfade. Like, there's so many fun things you can do with that. Anyways, I want to show you how to make a time lapse with Premiere Pro, which is maybe more accessible for a lot of people. Premiere Pro doesn't open up raw files, so we need a proxy, an intermediary file, which would be a JPEG sequence. So once you're done editing, you're going to go File, Export with all these photos selected, and you're going to export full resolution JPEGs or possibly PNGs. That could work as well, or TIFFs, which will retain more quality because JPEGs are 8-bit files, which you might get banding in the sky. For example, if you don't know what banding is, this is an extreme example. Banding looks like these bands in the sky. There's not enough color information to create a smooth gradient, which is why you want to retain the highest possible quality always, which is why I recommend going from your raw file and rendering that directly into a video file, as opposed to going raw file, JPEG, video file. The less compression, the better, obviously. Also wanted to show you some flickering earlier. I'm not sure if you'll see that. Yeah, that's some really bad flickering. You see, it's a pretty sunset, like a reverse sunset shot that goes into nighttime. But that flickering is really, really jarring, really distracting. So don't get flickering in your shot. Okay, to go back to, let's just close that. Let's open up this Premiere profile. You're going to go from so all your raw photos that you've color graded, you're going to go export, Shift Command E. And I've already done that. But yeah, you're going to go to whatever file. I'm going JPEG here because it's small file size, quality 90. I'm not sure if that's still a thing. Like it used to be, like for online social media, 84 used to be the best quality percentage. I'm not sure why it's on 90. I don't think it matters too much. But I've already done that, obviously, to make this a bit more efficient. So you have a sequence now of JPEG files. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, blah, blah, blah. You can import this into Premiere Pro and then export that as a video file. And you can also do that with Photoshop, which we'll get to shortly. I'm sweating. It's hot in London today, once again.
It seems like you guys are having the hottest weather.
It was 36 degrees a couple of weeks back, and we had an electrician supposed to come by that was booked in, and I was at home all day, as opposed to being in a cool hotel lobby doing some admin work. I was home all day with no air conditioning, and guess who didn't show up? The electrician. Let's import some media. Once again, double-click here in the Project tab, and we're going to navigate to our folder, which is here, this JPEG export demo that we just exported. And once again, with just the first photo selected, make sure this options tab here is open. Make sure this is an image sequence. This will only show up if this entire sequence is sequential or numerically, additive, or however you say it. So it goes from 1, 2, 3, blah, blah, all the way to 100. So image sequence, import, and would you look at that? This is now the equivalent of a video file. You right-click that video file, and you go new sequence from clip. And now we have the equivalent of what was a composition in After Effects. We now have a sequence in Premiere Pro. Whoops. Oh, I hit the wrong button. You can preview this. I mean, I have a terrible computer for live streaming, etc., but this is supposed to play back as a video clip from these source photos. Now you just go File, Export, Media, and choose your settings. I have the Apple ProRes 422 HQ preset, which retains a lot of quality, but is, I believe, a 14-bit video file. Doesn't really matter anymore, though, does it? Because we've created 8-bit JPEGs, and you can't recreate that lacking bit depth or color information. So, yeah, might as well create a H.264 here. But just to show you, if I now hit export, it's exported. So we've gone from raw files to JPEG files to video file using Lightroom and Premiere Pro, which quite a few of you would have access to. Now, in case you don't have Premiere Pro or After Effects, we can also do this in Photoshop. Extremely simple, extremely straightforward. Let me close some things because I don't have an infinite amount of RAM. I mean, I got 64 gigs of RAM on this laptop, which is too much, but still. What am I doing here? Okay, so we're in Photoshop. Let's fill the screen. File. Open. And once again, we're going to navigate to our folder with the JPEGs. Select the first photo of that sequence. Down here, you have image sequence. Make sure that is clicked. And now you get to set your frame rate. I choose 25 frames per second. You can choose whatever you want, 30 or 60 or a custom one even. Stop motion works well at 15 frames per second if you're doing a stop motion animation. But I have been working 25 FPS for ages, so I'm just going to go with that. And now, probably a window or a panel that many of you haven't seen. Check it out. You got yourself a video editing timeline in Photoshop, which
very cool. Very cool.
It's tricky to play back, but I think you can render. I hit play now. Oh yeah, it's very slow. But funny thing you can do here is you can actually add keyframes. Let me just go. Oh, can you add keyframes for position? Yeah. So if I were to scale this up a bit, oh, I should have practiced this earlier. Go V, no V, transform, command, transforming your video layer, smart object. Let's not use that as an example. If you zoom in a bit, and then you add a keyframe here, and a keyframe at the later bit, you can move that over time in that timeline. So this is a timeline video editor, but obviously it's Photoshop and it's not ideal to be editing videos. But Adobe has that Photoshop and Lightroom plan for like 10 or 15 a month. So this is an option to create time lapses. How do you export this? You go to File, Export, and then all the way at the bottom, Render Video. And depending on if you have Adobe Media Encoder installed or not, you have a different amount of codecs. But I would just go with the H.264 in the custom size at 25 frames per second and export that. And boom, you have a video file. I won't be doing that now because that bogs down my whole system. But yeah, now you've seen how to create video files from your raw files that you shot using Lightroom Classic and After Effects and Premiere Pro and Photoshop. And I think that should hopefully help a lot of you on the way to start making some time lapses. And now we are at the questions bit.
Questions. Awesome, you made it. You covered so much stuff so quickly. Guys, don't worry. This is being recorded, so it's gonna be available for you to rewatch afterwards.
On the end screen. If you sat all the way through to the end, you deserve a 20% off code.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. Well, we still have 171 people here watching us live. So
that is great. That's
awesome.
A lot.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Alrighty, question time. Shoot. By the way, there's nothing worse as a presenter to do a whole thing and there's like, questions anyone? And it's crickets. Don't do that to me. I'm sweating too hard to not get any questions right now.
There are quite a few questions. Yeah, actually, Patty Schwerich is asking if you can give some tips on how to create night or Milky Way photography time lapses.
Yeah, that's actually how I got hooked on it first, because when I realized my camera at the time could do time lapses, it was nighttime, and I literally walked out of the house I was in and shot a Astro time lapse. And I recently found that on an old hard drive, and I'm going to make a video about it. But the funny thing is, and I describe this in my ebook and in my courses, Astro time lapse photography is exactly the same as this cloud time lapse that I just edited. It just uses longer exposures, and maybe finding your focusing is a little bit harder. The main challenge for Astro time lapses is to find the energy and the time and the locations to go to and to brave the night and the darkness and to go and do that. But some tips that I do have is use PhotoPills to plan when and where you're going to head out, because you won't always see the galactic core of the Milky Way that we're floating around in. So you can use those apps to see when the galactic core visibility is around in your location, in which parts of the year. A red head torch really helps at night because it doesn't reset your eye sensitivity to light. And some cameras, for example, the Lumix, also have an Astro mode where the back screen isn't super bright, but it has a red tint. So you can let your eyes adjust to the darkness, and then you can navigate a bit easier in the night sky. Depending on where you are and how humid it is, you might get fog on your lens. Everything I'm mentioning here, I've made videos about, and it's covered in these courses as well. But depending on the dew point and the temperature and humidity, etc., your camera will get all moist at night, and you can fix that by adding hand warmers to the bottom of your lens. And I literally, let me see if I've got it here. No, I don't have it. But yeah, I cut up the end of a sock. I cut that off. I slide a sock over this lens, and then I stick 2 hand warmers here. And over the span of like 6 to 10 hours, depending on the models you have, it keeps your lens warm enough so that water doesn't condensate on the front of it, because that makes like a really foggy look. Sometimes looks cool, but most often ruins your time lapse. Turn off noise reduction in camera, because that slows down your shooting. Turn off image review, because that slows down your shooting. So many tips. it's a really fun thing. It's a very rewarding thing as well. Seeing clouds in the sky move is cool. Seeing the galaxy that we live in, that we have always lived and probably forever always live in, move across the sky, and you've captured that light that's been traveling for millions of years, capturing that on your sensor and then editing that is fantastic. And then you get to see little satellites, or maybe you get a fireball and like shooting stars and stuff in there. It's mind-blowingly fun. So yeah,
I do agree. It's a topic for a class.
yeah, exactly. And I'm not even like a pro astro guy. I see guys like Alan Wallace that I absolutely adore. Yeah, that's just a whole other class. But I have dabbled enough in it to be able to teach people some stuff.
Awesome. More questions. John Gafford, how do you remove dust spots on a time lapse sequence, especially when the dust spots are in the sky when shooting moving clouds?
Yeah, tricky one, but not too tricky. I'm not sure if it's in Premiere Pro, but After Effects now has content-aware fill for video. And if you just Google content-aware fill video, you'll see that you create a little mask around your spot and let it analyze the sequence, and it'll use AI, machine learning, whatever they call it, Adobe Sensei, to fill in that spot with stuff that is smooth throughout the sequence. Or you can clone stamp in video. Just like in Photoshop, you have clone stamping per frame. You also have clone stamping for a whole video sequence where you find, just a spot from next to it. You can fill that in. It's not that complicated. It's complicated when you're moving your camera in a hyperlapse and it's moving like in parts of a building that you can't duplicate and stuff like that. But it's not a huge drama. But again, get it right in camera. Make sure that you clean your gear before you head out. That's my main advice there.
Awesome. Thank you. Enrique Basquet, does the lifespan of the camera, is it bigger with mirrorless cameras?
I think that's a common misconception. There are less moving parts. The DSLRs have the mirror box, obviously, that flips up and down, but they also have the shutter curtain. But mirrorless cameras also have the shutter curtain, depending on, obviously, if you're using mechanical or electronic. That's just the reality of time-lapse. It does lower the value of the camera for resale, but it's the only way to shoot time-lapses is to shoot a lot of photos. And in my opinion, it is very much worth it. And I also think that, say, for example, I believe my 1DX2 that I still have here was rated for, say it's 200,000 photos. It might be 500. I'm not sure what it's rated at. 200,000 photos that they calculate the lifespan of this camera and this shutter mechanism. They calculate that for people shooting, a couple of sport photos, running around, banging the camera around, new lens, boom, 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 more photos, maybe weddings. Those 200,000 photos is a different impact than 200,000 photos of this camera sat on a tripod and just clicking away like that. This is not based on any fact. This is purely instinct, or what I'd like to believe. I think that time-lapse shutters or the time-lapse sequences affect your shutter mechanism and the lifespan of your camera body much less than traditional photography shooting. What do you think, Raf? Do you think that makes sense, or am I crazy?
Kind of. Okay, then we have Bob. Please talk about adding an additional power source, power bank, directly to support your camera battery. For example, when taking astrophotography, that lasts for 8 hours. So how do you deal with this power?
Great question. Depending on your camera, this is again a reason I kept on using DSLRs for so long, because this LP6 battery on the Canons goes on forever. Like I could shoot like, I don't know, 2,000 photos on this, whereas the S5 battery is only rated for like 300 photos, and this dies straight away. But the S5 I can charge over USB-C PD with a big Anker power bank, and that can run for 48 hours. Whereas this one I can charge over USB. But then this one has a lot of aftermarket dummy batteries that you can plug into batteries or into a wall outlet. So depending on your camera system, either look into getting, for example, from Tether Tools, they make these dummy batteries that you can hot swap a battery with as well. I've got that system. Or for my streaming setup that I used to have, I would buy a wall plug for my 1DX that I used. But the last big job that I did that I sadly can't talk about because it's super, super awesome, I ran a very long extension cord, and 2 cameras were just running off mains power. I was shooting 2 cameras because I had a backup camera for the hero shot just in case. But, you know, I'm a pro, made it all work from the first go. So that's good.
Good to know. Then we have James Bolin. How do you set up the aperture when the light changes dramatically, like a transition from golden hour to blue hour, for example?
You can shoot on the same aperture for most shots. If you're going extreme from middle of the day. Hold on. My browser has lost connection to my camera. Can you still see me?
Yeah. I don't see you, but I can hear you. Maybe your camera has heat up.
Literally hasn't changed. It's got nothing on the camera here. Whoa, that's zoomed in now. Can I change camera as we're...
Yeah, sure.
Well, this might be a mistake. Now you get to use my MacBook camera. Why isn't that even showing?
I can just add your slides. And, we don't see you. Oh, here you are.
Yeah, something going on. Lumix webcam. Okay, weird. All good? Yes.
All good.
Well, as I talking about aperture, yeah. So on a lot of lenses, I shoot wide open f4 because they're really just sharp enough these days. But if you're shooting from middle of the day to Astro to Milky Way, that's can be up to 20 stops of light. How do you ramp from something in reverse? If you're going to end up at f1.4, what f-stop are you at before that in the middle of the day? You're going to have to change your f-stop. The issue with changing f-stops is, as opposed to changing your ISO speed, ISO value, or your shutter speed, is that the light physically is affected by a different size of tunnel that the light goes through. Whereas, and this obviously changes your depth of field. So if you're in a landscape, you might see these changes in depth of field if you have something in your foreground. Whereas if you only ramp your ISO and your shutter speed, you don't have an optical difference in your shot. I am of the thinking that I try to never change my f-stop as I'm shooting a Holy Grail shot. But I know people, my friend Mikael, London Viewpoint, some of you might know him, he does ramp his aperture for long day-to-night shots. And I'm going to be honest, it looks pretty darn good. But there are certain situations where ramping an f-stop isn't good, because you will see that optically in your time lapse. And the main thing I try to achieve with time lapses is create, as I was talking about earlier, these big cinematic shots that show our world from a different viewpoint, from a different dimension. You want to really draw people into this beautiful cinematic sequence. That's why we try to come up with the nicest looking motion blur and the best settings and dynamic range. And then you can get pulled out by that because you're noticing that the foreground shifts weirdly. So I try to make sure that I don't destroy that illusion for people by minimizing optical changes to my shots.
Awesome, thank you. Now, Mr. Hydrohead, do you ever use auto features in Lumix?
Yes, something I love. Lumix I met one of the Lumix people once at a trade show, and they told me, I don't know if this is fact, that they watched some of my videos to improve their time-lapse features, which is the dream for me, obviously. I wish every brand did that. But what Lumix does really well, I'll describe how I shoot a Holy Grail shot. You put on time-lapse mode, I turn it on aperture priority mode, automatic ISO, and f4 or whatever f-stop. And then you go into the time-lapse settings, and you make sure that exposure leveling, I'll put it on screen here. Oh, you won't be able to see it. It's called exposure leveling. You make sure that exposure leveling is on. Instead of changing the exposure between photos by 1/3 of a stop, or the equivalent of one click of a wheel, which we're all familiar with, I think, it actually changes it incrementally over many photos. So it might go from ISO 100 to 103 to 106, 109, as opposed to going from ISO 100 to 125 to one. Oh, I'm getting all the values mixed up. I look like an amateur now. But it doesn't go in 1/3 of a stop. It goes in really incremental values, and it knows that the light is changing, so that when something bright all of a sudden comes up, it doesn't like shift the exposure up or down massively. It gradually changes over like 10 or 20 photos. And that's what Lumix does really, really well. It only does that at one speed, though. The Sony cameras allow you to dial in the speed at which it changes it follows the changing light. But so yes, to answer the question, do I use any auto options? I use that exposure leveling, which is pretty much auto exposure, Holy Grail time lapse, all the time, almost for, I want to say 99% of my sunset or sunrise time lapse shots these days.
Awesome. Now we have Vanessa Franking. Hi, Vanessa. Do you have a Holy Grail YouTube video?
Yes, it's one of my most popular ones. Let's see if I can. If I Google Holy Grail time lapse, it's not my video. Oh no, there it is. Complete Holy Grail time lapse tutorial with LR time lapse, 29th of July, 2018.
Okay, cool.
That's the one. That's the one you want. It's the Holy Grail of Holy Grail time lapse tutorials.
Nice. Yeah,
pretty much everything we talked about today is an individual video on my YouTube channel, by the way.
Nice.
But then I have extra videos in the courses as well. But I'm passionate about sharing the techniques of time lapse, because then I get to see more cool time lapses from all over the world. And so you will find literally hundreds and hundreds of videos on my YouTube channel that talk about majority of what we've talked about today.
Yeah, actually, Adam Romanovic is asking the same thing, but for Canon, you have a video on Holy Grail process.
Yeah.
For Canon.
I think I don't have a playlist for Holy Grail, but I've got a hyperlapse playlist which has like 13 different ways of shooting. But there's a time lapse tutorial playlist which has many different ways of shooting, including video mode and crossfading videos or raw files, manual methods, bulb ramper methods, all that stuff. So you'll be able to find in-depth tutorials on my channel.
Yeah, make sure to subscribe to my channel. It's an amazing one. You want to learn time lapse and also check his course, of course. 3 last questions, man. Richard Bellamy, does the Canon EF trick work on the RF lens series?
I don't know. Good question. I need to write that down. I need to look that up. I don't have an R series camera. From memory, I can't recall doing that on there, and that would be because I didn't figure it out. So because the lens mount is so new and they have so many more contact points on the RF lenses, I doubt this method still works. So that's a very good question. I think this only works for legacy EF systems.
Okay, Linda Lander, do you know how to lock aperture on Sony's?
No, I don't. I love that there's so many questions about this. Something I will say, if you do have that aperture flickering, that's a very easy fix. I have many videos about that, how to fix that using plugins or frame blending, frame smoothing and stuff. So it's not the end of the world, but it's something, if you can avoid it, you should avoid it. But if you do end up with it, it's really not a hard thing to do.
Perfect. And then the final question from Gary Hook. I would like to hear more comments about LR time-lapse software. My understanding is that it is critical for the flickering. maybe not an issue if the aperture issue can be addressed?
So LR Time Lapse is a software that has many different features. One of them is deflickering. Deflickering of your exposures when you manually adjust your settings as the sun's going down, which creates this zigzag pattern. It also recognizes aperture flickering and can deflicker that. It also allows you to ramp settings over a long sequence, like your white balance or contrast or exposure. It allows you to move gradients. So it does a lot of things. It is, in my opinion, a must-have for anyone that is serious about time lapse. You don't need to have LR time lapse, but it does really, really help you. Also in your efficiency, in your rendering, in your workflows. It allows you to like check things like this sequence is finished, or I'm still working on that one. I've got a lot of videos about LR time lapse as well, and an affiliate link on my site and channel. I'm a big fan because it has allowed us to just be more efficient in our editing of our time lapses. But you don't need it per se, but I do recommend it. For example, something that I did today in the demo, to create the demos before the stream. Remember when I was copy and pasting all the settings across the sequence? Some of the photos didn't get synchronized properly, which sometimes happens if you do it with this method. I've never seen that happen when I synchronize the settings using the LR time-lapse workflow. So if you're going through 30 sequences and it's not consistent using the built-in Lightroom method, sometimes you're waiting on the render for hours and then you're looking at, 4 of these sequences need to be re-edited. You can save yourself a lot of time if you just do it right the first round with LR time-lapse. You know it's going to be good from beginning to end. So if you're serious about it, yeah, you can try it out. I think LR time-lapse is free to trial up to certain resolutions and up to 400 photos per sequence. And I'm also doing a giveaway of a full LR time-lapse license on my newsletter soon, which you can find on my website, etc. as well. And yeah, again, on my channel, lots of content about LR time-lapse, and it's pretty darn good software. Thank you for all the questions. I am parched. This was really, really fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us today, man. It's been great. It's been great. Any final words? Before we say goodbye?
No, just a big thank you. I don't know. I can't see how many viewers we've got. But if you stuck it out to the end, it's really
at the moment, 130.
Very much apprecited. If there's any questions, you know where to find me. I'm at Matt Joes. So you see Matt Joes on screen here. That's my username across Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, even. Awesome. Pretty much anywhere. I'd love to connect and see. If you're into time lapses or if you're going to make time lapses, please send them to me. I've been helping people with making time lapses for over a decade now as well. And I just love to see clouds from all over the world. So yeah, get in touch. Send me what you're making. And if you have any questions, let me know. You can find my courses here. Take that 20% code and run with it. A big thank you for watching. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, for joining us. It's been great. It's always good to learn from such a master. So thank you so much, everybody, for watching us. And well, before we say goodbye, I must say the same words I always say. Remember that you have the power to imagine, plan, and shoot legendary photos. So see you next Wednesday with another video, guys. Don't forget to give us a like, and see you soon. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Matt.
Bye.
Great job.
Cheers.